Senne Mennes, good to see you.
See you, Bob. Thanks for having me on.
So today, I know you and I have talked a couple times before, but today we are going to get a demonstration of ClauseBuddy, a fairly new product from your company, ClauseBase. And before we do any of that, why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and about your company and how long you've been around, what you do, give us some background.
Yeah, of course. So my name's Senne. I'm one of the co-founders of ClauseBase. I used to be a lawyer. I used to work in DLA Piper's Brussels office, specifically the IP and IT department, which is also where I met my co-founder. We at ClauseBase, we originally had our start with the eponymous product ClauseBase, which is still very much focused on document automation. Over time, we kind of like built off of that to basically build a Microsoft Word add-in that functions seamlessly with that document automation tool, which is primarily a web-based tool. And that add-in is what ultimately became ClauseBuddy. ClauseBuddy kind of was originally a sort of side product to what is now known as Clause 9, our automation product. And over time, we kept adding things onto it. When we were talking to clients, that we felt that there was a really big need to have basically this sort of all-in-one assistant that can help with a lot of the different challenges that lawyers face inside of Microsoft Word and to a certain extent Outlook as well. And ultimately, that gave rise to the ClauseBuddy that we have today, which is pretty much the most complete drafting toolbox that lawyers have, which, like I said, helps with all the different challenges that lawyers face when drafting or reviewing documents in Word. And that's what I'll be going through today.
It's great. And, this is probably very obvious, but I wonder if you could talk a little bit about why it's important to build a product that can operate right within Microsoft Word.
Yeah, so that was the original sort of mistake that we made, is that we focused very much on the web platform because that gave us a lot of configurability, right? That allowed us to build the product in a lot of different ways. That configurability is valuable up to a certain degree, but it also removes access to, like you said, the tools that lawyers live in. And so for us, making that jump to Word, where we're a little bit more constrained. Microsoft keeps us in check, doesn't allow us to do just anything. But that's meeting lawyers where they are already. That has proven invaluable, and is a very big part of the reason why ClauseBuddy is kind of our main product at this point.
In your Belgium-based company, where are your customers and kind of who are your customers these days?
Yeah, so we work with 50/50 law firms, in-house legal teams. We find that, unsurprisingly, both types of lawyers face challenges when working with Microsoft Word to draft and review legal documents. We still have a pretty broad base in Belgium because we were lawyers, and obviously our first customers came directly from our network, from people that we'd worked with for years. But we're starting to expand. Well, actually, we're not starting to expand. We've expanded quite well beyond the borders of Belgium already. So, our main customer bases are focused in Germany, the UK, the Netherlands, the US. Those are some really important hubs for us.
So, all right, do you want to launch into it and
Absolutely.
show us
Absolutely.
all about ClauseBuddy?
And then you should be able to see that now. And as you can see, I just have a Word document open right here. I have my ClauseBuddy add-in. And from here on, I can start leveraging my drafting assistant. We have quite a few different functionalities. Like I said earlier, we aim for completeness, and we aim for solving all of the different challenges that lawyers face in Microsoft Word. What we're going to take a look at today is a sort of leisurely stroll through some of the more popular functionalities. That was some of our biggest hitters.
I've got my
And so you
walking
can
shoes
see,
on. We're good.
there we go, there we go. So you can see that we have different functionalities that assist with different parts of the drafting or reviewing process, different challenges that lawyers face. Um, Maybe starting off with one of the more popular applications that we've seen in recent history with the advances of generative AI, is the rewrite, or the draft functionality, to basically call on generative AI to make changes to your documents. And so a good example that I like to show is, let's say that we have this indemnification clause here, which, as you can very much see, is very much in favor of the licensor. If we're not quite happy with that, we can just go to the rewrite text menu, where we will fill out a prompt to change this this clause a little bit. And you can see that we have a kind of workbench here. It's not as straight up and plain as, say, your Microsoft Copilot interface, where you just have the option to fill out a prompt. There's more that we can do here, but let's start at that basic level, right? So we could say this clause mutually favorable, for example. The idea behind being able to have clauses or even entire documents redrafted with the help of generative AI, this is not in any way something that, we are the only ones doing out there. Obviously, this is part and parcel of a lot of drafting tools out there. The one thing that we are differentiating ourselves in is layout awareness. And basically what that means is that if we insert the changes proposed by the AI to make this clause more mutually favorable, if we insert those in the documents, in track changes even, the styling, the formatting, the layout of the Word document is completely kept intact. And that is a pretty big challenge. Not even Microsoft Copilots, not even Microsoft's own Copilot, its own Word add-in, is capable of doing this. So if you try this with Copilot, you basically just get plain text, and then it's up to you, not even with the track changes, and then it's up to you to kind of piece together, okay, how does this plain text clause differ from the one that I just selected? And the time you spend on fixing formatting, visualizing how the changes were made, that's time that you could have also just spent on rewriting the thing yourself.
So is that primarily talking about the numbering and the paragraph setup, or does it go beyond even?
Yeah, so numbering, paragraph setup, and even terminology and things like that. So there's a sort of layout awareness, but there's also a context awareness to that. I can also show that very quickly. So if I were to say, let's say that I need a confidentiality clause for this agreement, right? And I'll draft this from scratch. I can just put my cursor in one spot, just say draft a confidentiality clause. This is a horrible prompt, by the way. Typically, you would want to be a little bit more complete about what you're trying to achieve here. But let's say that I just want a very quick confidentiality clause. I in no way clarified that certain terminology had to be adopted or things like that. But you can see here that automatically the new clause refers to the license contract, because that is how this agreement, as you can see here, for example, that is how this agreement refers to itself. You'll also note that it automatically chooses to have number 11 applied to that. Basically adopt the number 11. That is solely to kind of portray the styling of the clause being adopted, right? So the fact that, for example, we've got this indentation of these subclauses and this all caps title. If I insert this clause directly into my empty space here, then it automatically adopts the styling again of the formatting, the layout of the document that I'm placing it in. We call this phenomenon chameleon clauses, because they just kind of jump into a new environment and automatically adapt to fit that environment.
That's great. As somebody who's had to spend a lot of time formatting documents, sometimes it seems like document drafting involves more time formatting than writing.
Absolutely, absolutely. And yeah, that's been our experience as well. Also, just a lot of, cleanup work, right? I think that's an accurate term for it. Just, making sure that the document fits together, the different parts. Word is not inherently built, obviously, for legal drafting. It's much more general purpose. And so that means that there are certain challenges that lawyers face in that cleanup process, like making sure that the formatting is all cleaned up and all 100% aligned, that Word just has a hard time dealing with, or that you as a human would have a hard time dealing with, because Word doesn't really help you. And so a good example of that is, if we go into our finalize menu here, is the proofreading functionality. Like I said, Word is not built for legal drafting, and so typical errors for legal drafting sneak into documents in a manner that is basically inevitable. And a couple of good examples that the proofreading functionality can assist with. I mean, we're not just talking about spelling and word and grammar checking. That's something that Word itself can do. But here, things like, missing definitions for capitalized terms. The idea that, for example, we've got this term product right here. It's being used in Article 9.1. And the AI finds that term. It finds that it has been capitalized, but it doesn't find a definition for that anywhere. Not in a central definition list, not defined in line. This and just all of these terms in general. Finding this stuff for me as a human user would take a lot of time, and is just not a very good, not a good way to spend that time. It's purely production work. It's purely there to avoid embarrassing errors, essentially.
So where I find that that defined term has not been defined, can I then create a definition for it?
Yeah. So that's also an upgrade that we're planning to kind of build into the proofreading itself. But at the moment, the way that you would approach that is to then go into the draft new text and draft a definition for a product, for example, with, of course, that context awareness, then making sure that the appropriate terminology is applied and that substantive provisions are also okay.
Right. And I don't know that you said, but I mean, I assume that all of this applies regardless of whether you're drafting an agreement as an original draft or whether you're reviewing a counterparty's agreement that they've sent to you to review, right?
Yeah, and it applies to both obviously, and I think that's also a big lesson that we learned as a company. Like I said earlier, right? We started with document automation. Document automation is incredibly powerful technology. Even in the age of generative AI, we are still very much proponents of document automation. However, it only assists in the first draft, and that is just a very limited way of supporting lawyers. We felt, we still feel, which is why functionalities like these were specifically built to be able to be used post first draft, right? To assist in also even in situations where your organization is not holding them. So finishing up on the proofing, right? We've got a couple of typical checks that we can do. We've got terms that are not being defined, or vice versa, terms that have been defined, but the term is actually no longer being used anywhere in the document. This one's actually probably one of my favorites because there's a lot of legal nuance here. Essentially, the uncapitalized defined terms, what it does is the AI notices that you use certain terminology with a capital letter. So you're using certain defined terminology, like royalty, for example. There's a bunch of different royalties appearing throughout the document. And then it says, well, all of a sudden here in 3.2, you use that word with a lowercase r, and that could be deliberate, right? Typical example that I also like to give is in master services agreements, writing the word services with a capital S or with a lowercase s makes all the difference in the world. And there could be very valid, deliberate reasons why you would want to write it with a lowercase. But at the very least, it is a sort of assistance that you're receiving, a sort of reminder where the assistant basically says like, hey, maybe you want to check this out. Could be nothing, could be something that you need to fix. And that really encapsulates the sort of primary purpose of the proofreading functionality very well, which is anytime you're about to send out a document to a client, to a colleague, to a counterparty, run a quick proofread, make sure the embarrassing errors are out of there, save some time doing this sort of typical sanity checking exercise that need to happen regardless. That's really what this is for.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great.
Obviously, that's not the only things that the proofreading can check for. We've got invalid cross-references as well. Yeah. And tons of other issues besides. Not all of them are portrayed in this document.
Yeah. Good.
Oh, we've looked at some drafting on the spot already. We've looked at cleaning up some things as well. What we've alluded to a couple of times, what we haven't really mentioned just yet is the document automation piece. Right? I already said that we came from what is now known as Clause 9, which is a highly advanced document automation tool. We, along the way, also realized that the sort of super advanced use cases with every single possible element of configuration that Clause 9 offers, That is not something that is necessary or is a little bit too heavy duty for a lot of different use cases. And so what ClauseBuddy offers is basically a slimmed down version of that. Still very much the same premise. So here under Smart Templates, for example, we can see that we can use all of our different automated documents. And I'll go with our license agreement for now, maybe, where you can see that I can just, I'll make this a little bit bigger. I can create a first draft of a license agreement just like this one, just by filling out some information in my questionnaire. That information immediately appears on the left-hand side. If I'm ready, I can export that to Word or PDF. Now, obviously, document automation is about more than just filling out a couple of placeholders. There are mail merge functionalities that do that as well. There's also a big element of conditionality, optionality, legal flexibility in there. A typical example that I like to give is, let's say that we, on the topic of this license agreement, we want to say that the license is not remunerated. So by default, the answer is yes. If we switch that to no, we can see that a couple of things change. But if we ask ClauseBuddy to show the last changes that occurred because we changed that single question, you can see that actually a bunch of different changes were made. The terms were dropped from the definition, because obviously if we're working with an unremunerated license, then we don't need to talk about royalties. Some words were changed, a paragraph was dropped from a clause was dropped in its entirety, one single change, and that sort of ripples through the entire document. This is a fairly standard premise to document automation with ClauseBuddy. It's just another part of the different modules that support the drafting process. I think for most other vendors, this would be an entire product onto itself, and that would be like the sole product. Another neat little thing that I do want to emphasize on ClauseBuddy's Smart Template automation is that the biggest challenge that document automation has always faced in the past is that it takes a lot of time to set up, and there's a lot of training involved typically. The good thing about the advent of generative AI is that a lot of that stuff can be outsourced to the AI. Not all of it, but a lot. Let me just show you how in a couple of clicks, I would be able to automate this entire license agreement, which is currently kind of like more of a precedent style document. So ordinarily, I would have to go through every single, I probably would have to use in most legacy tools, I would have to use a web browser interface. So I'd have to, upload that document there and then identify all of these placeholders and variables manually and painstakingly. What I can do here is just say, look, let's have the AI do the markup. All of this is happening in Word. I don't have to juggle multiple different screens. Let's just have the AI do the entire markup of all of the variables that it can find, which it just highlights in blue. And that's our way of saying, or ClauseBuddy's way of recognizing that questions need to be asked on this in the interview. Let's have the AI do all of that. We'll upload the active documents, and then naturally, so the AI does recognize those blue highlights. Naturally, we have an empty questionnaire. We haven't really, put anything in the questionnaire yet. But there again, we can have this entire sort of screechy, very loud, unstructured list of variables. We can have that automatically subdivided into a neat interview, a neat questionnaire. We give that a little bit of time, and basically, what we've done is with a couple of clicks, we've automated this entire document. This would ordinarily have taken a couple of hours, probably in a sort of manual setting. And again, I fill out some questions here, and immediately the information drops in on the right hand side.
So your customers would take their own template libraries that they have. You're not providing pre-formatted templates within the product. They're building their own templates using this ability to basically create the questionnaire using generative AI, but based on their own library, and then they have that library available within ClauseBuddy.
Yeah, exactly. And so the reason for that is also, we see that a huge added value in smart template automation comes from being able to use your organization's own preferred standards. For law firms, that is already quite interesting, but especially for in-house legal teams, right? The way that a lot of our in-house legal clients are using this functionality is not to make it easier for lawyers to draft documents, but for their business colleagues. So a lot of our clients in-house have built entire self-service platforms where a bunch of their most popular template documents are made available centrally. Updates are pushed through centrally there. So anyone in the business who needs to draft a non-disclosure agreement, a master services agreement, a partnership agreement, data processing agreement, any of these sort of typical recurring documents, license orders, for example, all of that is created centrally. The lawyers are also very much in charge of all of the different optional elements, so optional clause that are in there, what is the exact wording and things like that. But now they can securely outsource that work because let's face it, the typical information that needs to appear in the document, like for example, identification of the parties and certain maybe commercial products that are being taken up, all of that information is typically already in the business. So, just make the template available centrally there. And yeah, just immediately improve the lives of your colleagues in the process.
How do they access these templates? Just through is it through whatever DMS or whatever else they're using internally?
I'm very happy that you asked that question because indeed, ClauseBuddy allows you to share these documents to, or rather, to share these automated templates to people who may not even have their own account, which is how in-house legal teams typically service their business colleagues. We don't expect them to buy ClauseBuddy licenses. In fact, those business colleagues have nothing to gain from being able to use this redrafting functionality or proofreading or things like that. Those are functionalities that are very much aimed at lawyers, but with a simple hyperlink that they can make available in a sort of central document management system, in a central work platform of some other kind, maybe in an individual email, they can service their colleagues and they don't even need an account to use this.
So they would share that link, and the business colleague would get be able to open it and answer the particular questions and generate the document and then route it back to the lawyer, or is that what would happen?
Exactly. That's exactly it. And so they open that hyperlink and they basically just see this entire screen right here in a web browser interface, of course.
Interesting. And what about also just the core library of templates? I mean, if I'm in a firm, 10 lawyer or 50 lawyer, 100 lawyer, do we all have access through ClauseBuddy to a common library of templates, or is this specific to each lawyer, or how does that work?
Yeah. So this is indeed something that by default is available centrally, available to everyone, but it's perfectly possible to kind of put in what we like to call sort of Chinese walls. Here, for example, you can already see that we can kind of zoom in on a couple of categories that relate to different legal domains, for example, or different departments. It's also possible to put up all sorts of access rights to really separate the content from, let's say, an employment team, from that of a banking and finance team, from that of a corporate team, etc.
Interesting. That's great. And then if there are going to be changes to a template, I don't know, some new law comes along that requires you to put in a new clause into a template, is that generally then done within ClauseBuddy, or do they kind of start all over again, generating the template anew? Or
No, so that is indeed done directly in Word itself. I can use this as this is basically my source document, right? That underpins this entire automated smart template. If I make a couple of changes here in 2.1, for example, let's make that a little bit bigger. I can just hit update, and now we're working on the most up-to-date version.
okay, great.
So that is in a nutshell, and I'll get rid of the markup here for a second. That is in a nutshell how ClauseBuddy supports the draft, the first draft process. Maybe that is also a good moment to kind of look into how we, again, made the evolution from focusing exclusively on document automation to kind of working in that Word add-in. And the original evolution that we made there was Clause 9 functioned on the basis of clause-based automation. So basically your templates are just stacks of individual clauses. So our thinking was, if we create a Microsoft Word add-in, we have our clients who have also already automated all of these documents and already have these huge clause libraries as a result. What if we just make that entire library available in a Microsoft Word add-in? That would already extend us beyond the first draft, right? And that's where the initial foundations were built for what we offer on the basis of clause retrieval or clause finding currently. So, like I said, the original focus was the ability to build a curated quality library with all of these automations that you built into the templates themselves. Those are all, of course, then also built into those clauses, and you can use that flexibility there as well. Then, but over time, we also realized that a lot of law firms and legal teams in general don't really have this sort of structured knowledge centrally available, or at the very least realize that this is something that they want, but haven't found the energy or the resources or the time to really build this. And so what they are sitting on is Word documents and PDF documents from 20 years of operating, their entire legal drafting history, through which they search every single time they need, that one clause that they remember drafting a while ago, right? The typical story that any drafting lawyer will be familiar with. And that is a challenge that we are meeting through the truffle hunt functionality. And what
You
the
are from
truffle hunt
Belgium.
does, I am indeed, yeah, that it shows there, right? It shows there, exactly. But yeah, so how it works is it basically integrates with your drafting history through either an integration with tools like SharePoint, iManage, etc., or just by creating a collection right inside of ClauseBuddy. You can also just drop a folder full of 10,000 documents and get started that way. But the end result is that you then say, okay, let's search for a keyword here, for example. I'm working in my commercial folder here, so I'm obviously going to get quite a few different results. I can filter down on these results further by leveraging the metadata contained in the original documents that these clauses are being extracted from. So I could say something like, I'm specifically searching for more recent clauses. And let's say that maybe I also want to have this author right here. And so now I'm already bringing those the 1,000 plus results. I'm already bringing them down quite a bit. If you then say like, okay, this is a useful clause that I want to use, the premise is exactly the same. We've got these chameleon clauses again here. We can just insert them, and immediately they adjust to the styling, numbering, the formatting, the layout of this document. And what we can even do is if we say like, this is useful, but actually what I wanted to do was make this a subclause, then we can also make that indentation straight away. Automatically, the styling of the document is completely respected.
That's still a pretty extensive truffle hunt if you've still got 151 results there. I assume by tailoring your search more specifically, you can narrow the results more.
There's tons of different, like we could also filter on the basis of length. We could filter on the basis of document type. We could filter also even on, for example, literal search that we just submit to the AI, like include a liability limitation cap or something, right? And we can literally, even without just using standardized filters, we can have the AI kind of search for clauses that contain those elements that we are really looking for. That's all part and parcel of the sort of process of searching for the truffle in the forest, the needle in the haystack, if you will. Yeah, that's what ClauseBuddy allows you to do.
That's great. We've all experienced that. We know it's somewhere. Yeah. We remember it somewhere.
Yeah. Exactly. And even better, right? Because what you're referring to is kind of the typical sniping process. We know it's there, and it's that one clause that we wrote 5 years ago, and it contains these keywords because I remember because I wrote it, or I had a hand in writing it. But that is a limitation in the sense that you're still only operating within the silo of your own knowledge. And what Truffle Hunt and the sort of corollary of quality library are really about is to democratize that knowledge a little bit, to break those silos, to allow lawyers to leverage the knowledge that their colleagues have built as well.
Yeah, that makes sense.
In any case, one more thing that I'll say on Truffle Hunt, and then we can move on from there. A lot of questions that we get is, well, what if, and I don't know if any of my current results have that, but what if you have a reference, a cross-reference? I mean, it's great that we have this individual building block being offered to us like this, but what if a cross-reference is made and I need to know what this clause was referring to? At any point in time, I can jump from the clauses view to the documents view. For example, here I can say, okay, jump into this clause and let me see what what this original document is all about. And I can then again also use this documents view to then jump back into the clauses view. So I could say, this is a pretty useful clause. Let me find similar clauses. And then I'm jumping back into my clauses view, and I can just kind of like jump back and forth from different views depending on the context that I need at the time.
Yeah. So this is drawing from the firm's DMS, or
Exactly.
you're not separately storing these somewhere.
You can, because we also find that a lot of organizations, store this across different pools. Different lawyers have different preferences, different teams use different tools, that kind of stuff. And so for them, it'll be a little bit easier to centralize this collection within ClauseBuddy. But yes, we do obviously, of course, go get the documents where they are already living.
Yeah. Okay.
So, like I said, Truffle Hunt, really good for finding that needle in a haystack, searching through 10,000 clauses and just, zooming in on that one clause that you need. However, there is still quite a bit of judgment call. There are quite a few judgment calls that lawyers still need to make. And we find, therefore, that these kinds of modules are especially useful for more senior lawyers who either know what they're looking for, that's the sniping that I was talking about, or who have the necessary legal skills to accurately identify whether a clause is interesting in light of, what they need at that time. That's something that maybe more junior lawyers don't always appreciate. So a sort of same side, a different side of the same coin, which is ultimately, clause extraction, is offered through the quality library. And the quality library is basically just a curated clause library. So we can have a couple of different folders, as you can see here. Let's go to the distribution contracts library here, for example. And I just have a folder structure with subfolders, as you can see here, right? So boilerplate clauses, dispute resolution clauses, applicable law. Like I can have this sort of very neat, very structured overview of all the different types of clauses that I would need in a specific domain for a specific type of contract, etc. But this stuff is all very much human curated. So whereas the truffle hunt is just, throw it onto one big pile and start searching for, that one clause in 100,000, this is very much focused on standardizing your knowledge, basically aligning everyone in a team on what are the appropriate clauses, what has been vetted on sort of a partner level, maybe even, or a GC level, and just getting everyone's noses pointed in the same direction when it comes to negotiating fallbacks, negotiating documents, using fallback positions and things like that. And so there is some manual effort involved here. There is also, of course, a funnel from the truffle hunt. If you're really happy with the clause, you can just funnel it straight into the quality library, where we can then save this clause to a library, augment it with some additional descriptions or comments or keywords or etc. That's an option as well. But the end result, if you do have and I'll just jump back in here very quickly. If you do have a library like this, you're basically making it much easier for everyone in the team to really see, okay, what has been explicitly marked as our standard clauses, our fallback clauses, our, high quality material.
So similar to what people would call a playbook.
It has elements of a playbook, and we'll actually come back on that as well. Really just making it so that there isn't really all that much doubt on whether a clause is up to date, whether a clause is good for a specific type of situation. All of those things are still typically in doubt when you're just, focusing on quantity through the truffle hunt, much less in doubt when you're focusing on quality through the quality library. And so, like I said, we an initial subdivision through these folders that we can add. We can then also, of course, search for specific keywords within that structure. We can, for example, say we can even use these folders to filter down even further. And then we also have these attributes, as we like to call them. Those are basically tags that you can add to these clauses that you're centralizing to kind of explain what is their legal and or commercial nuance. So here, for example, I have a clause that says, this is very much not in favor of the distributor. If I say, well, that's unfortunate because I need a clause that is very much in favor of the distributor, I can use that tag to find a clause that has received a better score on that front. And then again, if you want to then insert that clause, it's again just a matter of just inserting it, and immediately it adapts to the style and the formatting of the document. One thing that I haven't touched on yet, which both the Truffle Hunt and the Quality library have in common, is that we can also have this clause attuned to the document a little bit further with the help of AI. So we could say, let's make this clause shorter, and then we can also adapt the terminology, because obviously we're pulling in clauses from a different environment, or maybe a different use case or a different type of document. And what we can do is we can have those adapted automatically. But in this case, it would even be for a human be difficult to see, who is the distributor in this clause. Is that our licensor or licensee in our document on the left-hand side? Adapt this terminology as well. We can just say the distributor in this clause maps onto a term from our document, which is specifically licensor. And so you can see the adaptation to the style of the document, that happens fully automatically. The adaptation to the substantive content, that's something where we can assist the AI a little bit further to make the necessary redraft. And then you can see exactly here what changes. It's made a little bit shorter. The terminology is adapted. And what we can then even do is just paste that directly over our original clause, which will then also be shown in track changes. And if we paste over that, not in track changes, there we go. But just directly, that again just completely keeps that styling intact. So
Speaking of that, can you have all of that show up in track changes? I mean, if you have track changes turned on in the document, is all that going to show up as a track change?
yeah, we can just use insert with track changes directly like that. So that's all part and parcel. But that basically covers everything on the topic of clauses. Oh, actually, one more thing that I do want to add on to is, let's say that you are drafting, or rather reviewing, a third-party document, and you come across this termination clause, for example. Let's take this one, and you say, you know what, this is useful, but I need to make some changes. I need to see if we have our own standardized, fallback clauses maybe, or I need to see. I know that I wrote a clause somewhere a while ago, and I want to take elements of that into this clause. If that is the use case that you're facing, then it'll immediately become a little bit difficult to find that clause, because you don't remember, am I supposed to search through the quality library? Am I supposed to search through the truffle hunt? Where was that clause again? And that is something that we solve through the auto suggest, which basically allows you to have the AI look for you through your entire library, be it in the quality library, be it in the truffle hunt, to find semantically similar clauses, which we can then see here. For example, if we compare this clause left to right, we can see this. I have this one clause of mine, which is almost identical, except it doesn't have this one paragraph. That's already quite useful. But maybe even more interesting is the situation where I have my own standard clause. And actually, let's maybe go with this one, which is a little bit meatier. You can see here I have my own standard material, but there's quite a bit that differs from this original clause. And so maybe I'm a little bit hesitant to immediately just, replace this entirely, even with the track changes stuff, to replace that entirely with my clause. Here's another great example, right? These clauses both deal with termination, but they deal with it in such a different way that it even becomes impossible to make an accurate comparison. And that is something where we develop the smart merge functionality for. So for the idea that you just want to take elements of one clause and embed them into element of another clause, right? So just inserting over this in track changes doesn't help anyone. This is just a complete mess, and it's also poor negotiation etiquette, right? That's not something you do in a negotiation, just throwing out a counterparty's clause in its entirety and just replacing it with your own. No, you make
It is
surgical
something
tweaks.
some people do, but yeah.
Yeah, with something you shouldn't do, probably. But the smart merge basically allows you to then make a summary of your target clause and just break that down into its constituent components, make a summary of your library clause, break that down into its constituent components, and then pick and choose. Which elements are we including here? Which common elements are there already? We could say, let's go with all of these different elements, and then ultimately merge that into one single harmonized clause, which we can then, of course, again, insert, and which you can see leverages all of the different elements that we want to make sure are leveraged in the context of this exercise.
That's really interesting. And when it showed compare left to right or right to left, I assume that means compare the left document as sort of the source document against the right, or the other way around.
Yeah. So a really popular use case that we've recently started seeing is where the users will say, I know I'm reviewing a document where I know that there is a standardized clause in my library already, and I need to see just how much this clause differs from that standardized clause, because I know that that clause has been vetted. And what you can then do with that left to right is you can see here, okay, this compares the Word document to the clause in the library, and the right to left, and vice versa. The right to left, vice versa, then compares the library clause to the the document on the left-hand side. So you can see here, this either party may immediately, etc., etc. That is something that is added in the Word document, so that is then shown in green in this this flipped around way of looking at the comparison. So that is the clause menu. Now, with the little bit of time that we have left, I want to focus on another topic that you raised earlier, which is playbooks. And obviously, with the recent advances in generative AI, ClauseBuddy is very much also focused on assisting with the reviewing process. Actually, there's quite a few different contract reviewing tools out there nowadays. I want to kind of show you how ClauseBuddy works, and then also, of course, how we differentiate ourselves from the pack. We have the option to build playbooks. Those playbooks can even be extracted directly just from the text of a document, so that the AI builds playbooks for you based on your own standard template documents. And then if you have a template already in place, we don't really have time to look at the playbook building process, but I'll just run a playbook that we already have here. If you then have a playbook, like for example, here I have my license agreement, which obviously I'm going to run on my license agreement here. These are all the checks in the checklist that are being looked at. I can then basically get the AI to do a red flag, green flag analysis for me. So in the playbook, we defined a couple of positions that are important for us. And now the AI is going through all of these individual positions and clarifying whether they are met or not met through, as you can see, these red flags and green flags. The position here, for example, under applicable law, is the applicable laws to be German law, competent courts, those of Berlin. That is not met. And we can see that it is not met because it says that the courts of Australia apply. The laws of Australia apply, and the Sydney courts are competent. And we can indeed see that, for example, here in this applicable law clause. If we're not happy with that, we can just rewrite the selected text. And then again, our familiar redraft menu pops up, which we can then also use, obviously, to insert that clause straight into the document. But perhaps more interestingly, and a first point where ClauseBuddy differentiates itself, is that here we have a very cool first synergy between different elements of the toolbox. We are already building this quality library with our standard clauses, with our fallback positions. It's perfectly possible to then leverage these clauses so that the AI offers your standard clauses in light of the review that it is performing. So I can say like, okay, this is obviously this element is not met, like this requirement is not met. Consider adding our own company standard here, which you can then, if it makes sense, still smart merge, right? As we just looked at, or just insert that directly. That is something where ClauseBuddy differentiates itself. And then, of course, the layout awareness that that we go quite a bit deeper on than most tools out.
So a lot of options, a lot of options
A lot
for,
of options, a lot of
yeah.
options indeed. And so, yeah, we can go through these requirements one by one, but the ultimate premise is still the same, right? We get a prompt submitted to the AI, and the AI checks to see if that is present in our document.
Yeah. And I know you say you don't have time to walk through how the playbooks get created, but essentially, is it a matter of taking your forms, your documents, your templates, and using the generative AI to build a playbook based on that?
Yeah, I can actually, because it is fairly straightforward, I can actually jump into my admin environment to show you how it's done. Let's say that this is our standard clause. So we'll just say, let's take all our standard document rather, which this needs to go out of there, obviously. Let's say that we just say, okay, all of these clauses, this will basically constitute our playbook. What we can then do is just go into our Manage Playbooks menu, create a new playbook by extracting the rules of this from our text selection, give the AI a couple of seconds to go through this entire document and then translate all of these clauses that it is reading into a list of individual requirements. And as that comes in, I'll call this test 1, 2, 3. As that comes in, we've basically built our entire playbook just like that.
Mm-hmm.
I will not say is 100% ready because there's a lot of background knowledge or context that the AI may be missing, but at the very least, 80% of the work is pretty much already done.
Yeah. I've seen some companies do create playbooks based on libraries or collections of documents. Here's the 10 licensing agreements we've done this year, create a playbook based on this. Is that something that you would either currently offer or that you think would be useful for you to offer at some point or be able to do?
Yeah, so we see that quite often as well. Typically, that sort of coincides with a broader exercise of basically summarizing these documents into a central list of requirements. And we also have a functionality for that in the form of the summarize functionality, which allows you to indeed take those different documents and make a summary of them based on how the different changes occurred and things like that. So that is also, with a few extra clicks, something that that can be done in ClauseBuddy. But yeah, that's how we
Yeah.
approach that.
All right. And what happens when you click the finalize tab up there? Was that what you were showing before with the?
Yeah, that was what I was showing before. So
Yeah.
we have that proofreading, and then there's
Okay.
two
Okay.
functionalities
Right.
that we haven't even gotten around to yet,
All right. Good.
which listeners or viewers will have to reach out to the ClauseBase team for.
They will have to do that because we are about out of time. But really, it's a really impressive product. I got to say, and one of the most kind of robust in terms of the array of features and capabilities that you offer for lawyers who are involved with drafting and reviewing contracts. So appreciate your taking the time to show it.
Yeah, of course, and thanks for having me on.
Yeah. All right. Well, again, thanks for doing this, and hope all of you. How can people best follow up with you if they want to learn more about this?
So obviously, anyone's welcome to check out our website. We have a demo booking form if you want to have a more personalized walkthrough of all the different options. Maybe look at some of the stuff that we haven't even gotten around to yet today. And you can reach out to me personally over LinkedIn.
All right, Senne Mennes, co-founder of ClauseBase, showing us ClauseBuddy. Thanks again. See you soon.